Thank you very much for that, Linda. Thank you to everyone for being on the call today. What we're planning to do is just as a process thing, I'll talk for just a few minutes, just introducing some of the issues that may be on people's minds, giving you an update on where the campaign is at, and that will allow some people who are still connecting to the conference call to get on board, and also allow people to start submitting their questions to our volunteers so that we can start to get some of these questions up in front and center. So we'll hear from you as much as anybody else, because I know you got on this call to ask questions, and some of you to listen to what's on the minds of fellow New Democrats. So here we are at the final leg of the race. There's a little less than a couple of weeks to go. Many people have received their ballots. Others are receiving them still in the mail. And one thing, first things first, just to explain the voting process, because I think that's important. A lot of people are wondering. For mail-in ballots, the deadline, I believe, is actually this coming week, this Monday. And for those that haven't received the ballots, this is maybe a bit of a glitch in the system, because in order to get your ballot back out in the mail and be validated in the physical way, if you don't have it yet, of course, it's impossible to mail. So we may be asking you to get with a friend if you don't have a computer yourself and be able to vote online. And voting online is actually extraordinarily easy as well with your ballot. You can do it from a computer and also just many phones. So that's where we're at in the process. And as Linda said earlier, thank you so much. We are a campaign that is backed by many, many hundreds of individual donors. We wouldn't be able to even do this town hall or get me around the country if it weren't possible, if it wasn't for the donations from folks like yourselves. It is grassroots in all of the sense. We don't have any big money sitting out there that makes this all possible. The campaign has been 6.5 months of an honor and a whirlwind for me personally. I've got young boys at home, Isaac and Elliot, with my wife Diana. They're just turned 19 months. They're twins. And being away from them has been tough, but also validated. I just talked to Diana a little while ago, my wife, and we talked about the purpose of this thing, which is to raise questions, to also provide a vision and some ideas about how it is that our party takes the next step, because there's a whole new generation out there that's waiting and willing to be involved, but we have to speak to them. And we can't just use sloganeering and robocalls to do it. We've got to be able to talk to them on issues that matter, about climate change, about protecting BC's coast, about making sure things like the Enbridge pipeline never come to fruition, because a government that thinks Canadians who raise their voice in opposition are radicals or enemies of the state is not fit to be government. And we need to respond to that cynicism, to that bullying, with a much more positive message, one that includes people, whether it be First Nations, environmental activists, people who just care and want to protect our way of life. All those folks need to be brought into the conversation, not pushed back out. So if you're interested in getting engaged with this campaign, there's lots of ways to do it. If there's ways that you can help us out, either through the donations, but as much with connecting one person to another, that is, in fact, what's happened. So just this afternoon, we had our debate here in Vancouver. It was picked up on CPAC, and I think CBC was also doing some filming. You'll be able to see that on the NDP's website at ndp.ca if you didn't catch it live. It was a vigorous debate. The debates have become much more poignant and purposeful as we've gotten along. There's lots of agreement, of course, because we're all New Democrats and believe in some fundamental things. But you'll also be able to see some distinctions in the campaign. I'll talk about the need for us to cooperate, not just talk about new politics, but to actually manifest it, to cooperate with other parties in advance of the next election. This has been somewhat controversial. I should probably take a second just to explain what our cooperation plan means, because there's been a fair amount of misunderstanding as much as understanding. I've said in the next election, prior to the next election, in the 167 conservative seats, I would give New Democrats an option. And if a local constituency, a local riding association, wants to hold a joint nomination meeting, that would be between us, Liberals and Greens, I would offer that choice up. So if a Vancouver Island North Riding Association or someone in Ticton who currently has a Conservative as their Member of Parliament wanted to hold a joint nomination meeting, we would allow it to happen. The decision happens at the local level, and some people are so enthused by this idea, and other people are somewhat reluctant. I understand that this is controversial. Look, I'm running to be leader of this party, not dictator. I think we should have all ideas on the table. I think we should have all hands on deck, because this Conservative government has pointed us in a direction that is completely not aligned with Canadian values. Values around cooperation, values around respecting voters, values around dealing with the climate and the environment as we talk about creating jobs. So for all of these reasons, I've recognized that these Conservatives are a clear and present danger. They are not our parents or grandparents' Conservatives. They're a different animal entirely. And if 9 months has been terrible with these folks, 8 years is not an option. And we need to be clear and purposeful in what we're trying to accomplish. So that's just been one of the issues we've talked about. We've also talked about a better and fair economy, the ways to have an energy economy that works for us and gives us that kind of security. We've talked about food policy and having real and decent food security in this country for the first time in a generation. If that's something that you're interested in, we can absolutely talk about it today. We need to be able to talk about restoring faith in our democratic systems. So I very much look forward to your questions and calls, and I think I've ragged the puck enough to allow people to get online and join our conversation. Maybe we'll turn to our first question.
Thank you, Nathan. If you're just joining us, this is the BC Yukon Town Hall with Nathan Cullen, and we're going to try and get through as many questions as we can with you today. We will start with a live question from Wally in Nanaimo. And you can go ahead with your question now, Wally.
Okay, as far as I'm concerned, there's too much power that's been vested in the Prime Minister's office. Wondering if you agree or disagree, and could you say why?
I think it's a great question, and Wally, you're absolutely right. It's increasing. The Prime Minister's office has grown by a factor of 4 in the last 10 years. So it's become huge, not just the number of people working there, but in the absolute power that the Prime Minister's office has. One proposal I've put forward that doesn't get a lot of attention because it's a little bit of inside baseball, but I think the power that political leaders have right now to sign off on the nomination papers of people who are duly elected by the members in ridings like Nanaimo or Prince George or here in Vancouver, I think that power should be taken away from the leader. If a candidate stands for a nomination and is elected fairly at the local riding, why is it that we give the leaders so much power? Now, to the Prime Minister's office, when we form government, we have to recognize that Canadian scientists and civil servants need to be able to speak to Canadians. You folks, we paid for this. We hire these people to do good work on our behalf. The Prime Minister's office has become a vetting office for every inquiry that's coming in, and no longer are civil servants and scientists free to speak. I think leadership politics, of course, is important, but we've gotten into a pathology and a pattern that says everything, and I mean everything, is now focused on the power of the Prime Minister's office. I want to give that away. I hope we've run a campaign that shows that we're interested not just in talking about the grassroots, but actually believe in it and believe in the power of ideas rather than the concentration of just my particular friends and my own voice.
Thanks, Nathan, and thank you, Wally, for that question. For those who have just joined us, you're connecting with Canadians from across BC and the Yukon, and we've just heard from Nathan Cullen. I'll remind you that you can press 0 on your phone at any time to ask Nathan a question. And you can actually also press 7 if you would like to make a donation to the campaign or 1 to become a campaign volunteer. And we do have another question that I can bring forward from Audrey on Salt Spring Island. Go ahead with your question, Audrey.
I was wondering about the NDP policy, and yours in particular, on GM foods and labeling and maybe prohibition on GM crops.
It's a great question. It's on the minds of many Canadians because we know this is possible, first of all, to actually label these products, these food products that have genetically modified material in them. We know it's possible because Europe does it. We also know that Canadians want to be more informed, not less informed, about the food that we consume. One of the people helping out our campaign is Alex Adonamenko, our MP from the Interior, who has crisscrossed this country for many years now, talking not only to consumers of food, Canadians, but also to the producers. And producers want to be able to provide good, healthy food to Canadians of the highest standard, not the lowest. I can point you to a bunch of examples where, say, the Americans or the Chinese have a lower standard who allow more pesticides, let's say, or more GM to be in the food. Canada has actually watered down our own regulations. Before any court challenges or lawyers get involved, we just roll right over. And the killing of the wheat board, all of these things, I think, contribute to food insecurity. So I've said, let's label GM foods right across the board. Let's allow consumers to choose. And my belief is, and I think this belief will be confirmed in truth and reality, that Canadians will vote with their wallets, and they will choose foods that are more locally grown, but also more secure, with less genetically modified materials in them, not more. So, yeah, let's get on with the job of labeling and providing real food security for Canadians.
Good.
Thanks for that great question, Audrey. We actually are going to take a question from Twitter now, which came in just shortly ago from @GotSocialism. And the question for Nathan is, my question for today's town hall, how are you going to inspire young voters?
Thank you for the question. And for people following along, you can also submit questions through Twitter, which is, fancy and popular and is quite a democratic tool if you know how to use it. Well, I think to the questioner, part of the way we run this campaign is exactly speaking to young people. We've talked about politics that isn't shutting people out of the conversation, it's bringing them back in. This is the most connected generation in the history of humankind, and yet they're not often connected to partisan politics. And why? Well, I think we have to take some responsibility for that. I think we've made it so that it's total war politics all the time, and it's where parties rule over top of issues. I think Canadians vote based on issues more than they do parties. I believe people become inspired and motivated to join organizations, not just because the organization exists, but because the organization speaks to their values. These political parties are no different than anything else. We're vehicles that we've created to take us from here to there, and there is better than here, hopefully. The idea of connecting people, young people, through our social media, but also through things like Create Your Canada. It's a project I started and I want to spread across the country, in which young people design bills. These are young people in high school that allow members of Parliament to introduce legislation on their behalf. And these young folks, being so connected, have come up with unbelievable ideas to make Canada a better place. So I think we have to live it. We can't just give young people platitudes. We actually have to show them that we mean it. And when we do that, my experience in this campaign and the ones I run in Skeena has shown that young people come out in droves because they care. Of course they care about this country and where we're headed. And a lot of the questions we have today, the answers we give, are going to be impacting those generations for many, many years to come.
Thanks, Nathan. That was a great question. And I'd like to welcome those of you who may be joining us on the phone for this live town hall with Nathan just now. Today's town hall is in English, and we do have a French language town hall that runs later this week. And I'll remind you, if you'd like to ask a question, you can press 0 on your phone right now. And I have another question coming to us via Twitter, which is, some say that cooperation is anti-democratic. How would you respond?
Well, first things first, we have to recognize that the electoral system we have right now is broken. Obviously, with a government that won less than 40% of the vote, of those who bothered to vote, which actually translates to about 24% of all voting-age Canadians. So first things first, let's recognize and acknowledge that the electoral system has to change. We need a mixed-member system. Let's also recognize that I'm the only candidate that's talked about bringing in a new system as my first bill. The first law that we would introduce is moving our system to something in which every vote truly does count. Now, to the idea of what cooperation does and doesn't do, of course, within this broken system, we need to figure ourselves a way out because the majority of Canadians are progressives, and they are not being represented or reflected by this government and its values. So we need to change that, replace that. Know this, though, that the decision as to whether to hold a joint nomination meeting to be cooperative is a decision that will be taken by the local membership in the riding, not by me, not imposed by me. I'm looking to run as leader and be the leader, not dictator. It's important that people understand that the choices that get made by New Democrats will be localized and fundamentally democratic. Now, to join into these joint nomination meetings means taking out a membership, but so true is it to pick leader of this party, right? That 130,000 Canadians will be picking the official leader of the opposition. If Mr. Harper were to decide that he was unable or unwilling to continue as Prime Minister, let's look forward to that day. But that choice would be made in absence of a general election by conservative members who hold membership. So that's the system that we have. Let's use the system that we have to make things better, not worse. And I think joint nomination, I think cooperation is truly a Canadian value. And by the way, Canadians have loved us when in the past we've found ways to work with other parties. They've rewarded New Democrats every single time we've done it.
Thank you, Nathan, and thanks to everyone who is submitting questions on Twitter and also who are in the line to ask a question. We're going to get through as many of these as we possibly can. And right now we're going to go to Guy in Duncan, and you can go ahead with your question.
Yes. Considering the voting fraud and level of corruption in Ottawa, at what point will that government in Ottawa cease to be legitimate?
Thank you, Guy, for the question. That word you raise is a very powerful one. The legitimacy of this government has been called into question by their own actions. When conservatives knowingly disenfranchised Canadians, by that I mean prevented them from exercising their democratic rights, the conservatives also called into question the legitimacy, the democratic legitimacy of the government that they now hold. Apparently there's more news coming out tomorrow about even more ridings and more direct evidence. We have to let Elections Canada do its work, certainly, but I was at a rally just this afternoon in Vancouver that was taking place right across the street from our debate. And, Canadians from across the political spectrum are offended by this and want to see some recourse. My personal opinion, I think we should be going door to door in those ridings right now and working with allies, working with people in civil society, unions, First Nations groups, who also know that this government may have achieved power through illegitimate means. If we all read this story and it had come out of Africa, or Central America, or South Africa, we would have said, oh, well, there's the developing world again where they're running fraudulent elections. I think there's a bit of a shock value going on right now. Canadians are stunned that this took place in our country, and it goes back to my point that these are not our parents' or grandparents' conservatives. These folks are willing to do anything, absolutely anything, to win and maintain their power. So we have to recognize who the opponents are in this one, and that these folks need to be taken on straight on. And I'm a campaigner. I believe we need to take this out of Parliament as well as our work in Parliament and go and talk to Canadians who will unite behind this idea that our democracy is more important than the ambitions of any one political party, and that we have to send a clear signal to all the parties that we won't tolerate this. And that only happens if we campaign. That only happens if neighbors are talking to neighbors and we go out and go forth and make sure that this movement becomes the end of this kind of cynical wedge politics that seems to have no morals or scruples whatsoever.
Thank you, Nathan, and thank you for the excellent and timely question. Remember, you're on the line with Nathan Cullen and thousands of people from British Columbia and the Yukon. And if you have a question for Nathan, you can press 0 on your phone now, and we will try and get to as many of you as possible. And right now, we're going to go to Linda in Victoria, British Columbia. You can go ahead with your question. Oh, sorry, I put the wrong person into the queue. So we have another question, and this one is actually from Ronald in Ladysmith.
Hello.
Hi, Ronald. Go ahead with your question.
Hello. Yes, Nathan, you have touched upon what I was asking. Actually, I'm very interested in total electoral reform, where the first past the post is eliminated, that we should move to a much more democratic. I think our democracy has actually been severely harmed by the system that we have. Anyway, how do you stand on that issue?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Ronald. It does, often in politics you talk about particular issues. They may be a pipeline here, climate change, First Nations rights and title, on down the line. But what underlies all of those issues when you're talking about politics and you're talking about the House of Commons is the state and health of our democracy. And I don't know about you, but I'm not sure we've ever experienced such a cynical government and such a depressing time where these folks somehow feel comfortable with the idea of telling Canadians not to vote, of pushing people away, and know that this is all part of the pathology of what they call voter suppression, right? Turning people away, driving the debate down into the mud, personal attacks and all the rest of it, and it's got to stop. This isn't about right and left. This is about right and wrong. So in terms of your question, about electoral reform, I would want to encourage and bring in a piece of legislation right off the bat, because I do believe it's a foundation of who we are, that would allow for two things: a voting system that is easy to understand. Secondly, a voting system that would mean that in every part of this country, regardless of where you live, your vote would matter and be reflected in the parliament that took shape. Because right now, so many people are discouraged. They say, I live in a conservative riding or a liberal riding or a New Democrat riding or a Green riding, whatever it happens to be. And they feel like their vote doesn't matter. And this directly impacts young Canadians disproportionately, who need to be encouraged and given reasons to vote. And right now we have a system that's giving them reasons not to vote. So, first things first, let's get at the underlying issues. Let's get at our foundation of who we are as Canadians. And all of those other issues become much more easy to tackle. Let me end with this. If you do change the system, people should have their eyes wide open. You change to a mixed member system or some other variant of electoral reform that allows for good reflection of Canadian values and their hopes, you will also likely adopt a system in which political parties have to share power more often in minority governments and coalition governments. We have to be open and accepting of that. And I for one, believe that that's a good thing. Because I think when we share, when we exchange views, and we wrestle with these questions, we become stronger at the end of the day. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Nathan. And we're going to go right to Linda in Victoria, since I missed her the last time around. Go ahead with your question,
No
Linda.
problem. Hello, Nathan. I agree with what you've been saying. However, let's talk the real zero-sum game reality out there. You're a Prime Minister of Canada. You're on the international stage. You are trying to talk with whomever about the oil sands / tar sands, whichever, keep Canada's integrity, and still deal with some very significant different power structures across the globe than what we have here in Canada. How do you stand tall, and how do you draw the line?
I want to make sure I understand your question entirely, Linda, but I guess know me by my actions even more than my words on this one. I've represented the northwest of BC for the last 4 elections. I've run 4 times, won 4 times, beat a Conservative to get in, one of the the only candidate in the race to do that. But more importantly, I'm not a weather vane. I don't try to blow in the wind of political persuasions and try to guess what you might want me to say and then guess what the next caller wants me to say and keep changing my positions. I think it's important to take in all the best intelligence you can, make decisions on some fundamental values and things that you hold dear, and then try to find those uniting issues, which is what we do in northern BC, and I think in good elections. We find those places of common agreement. And I know you raised the oil sands. I was in Fort McMurray not that long ago. A single-bedroom detached house going for $850,000 is an overheated, out-of-control economy. And people in Fort McMurray recognize this. When we talk about changing the whole approach to the oil sands, it doesn't become an Alberta versus the rest of Canada thing. We got to find that sweet spot that says, this is a Canadian question. This is a question for all of us, that energy security, the way we handle our environmental concerns, the way we approach and respect First Nations rights and title, that implicates all of us, whether you're living in Victoria, Fort McMurray, or downtown Toronto. And the question of these pipelines, I think the reason it resonates, and it has resonated, by the way, right across this country, it's been breathtaking for me as a representative from the Northwest. People want to know about this. They're concerned, and they want a government that's a little bit more balanced. So take that out to the international scene. Holding dear to those Canadian values of consensus building, cooperation, that's when Canada is strongest on the world. I think our position in the Middle East under this government is completely misaligned. Somehow we've become so on one side of the question between Israel and Palestine, we've lost all credibility in the region. Our influence has gotten down to zero. I think we need to have foreign policy that reflects Canadian values, that doesn't try to impose some sort of skewed vision of the world on us and then on our allies internationally.
Thank you so much for that great question, Linda, and thanks for hanging in there with us. For all of you that are just joining us, this is a telephone town hall with Nathan Cullen in BC and the Yukon, and we're trying to get through as many questions as we can this afternoon. You can press 0 on your telephone at any time to if you have a question for Nathan, and we're going to go over to Mike in Terrace. Mike, go ahead with your question.
Hi, Nathan. Thanks for the telephone town hall here.
And Mike, good to hear from Tina.
Right on. This question kind of takes off on a point you just sort of mentioned in your last response. I'm wondering if you could speak to national energy security and a strategy to transition off fossil fuels. And
well, this thing, there's been some speculation within the oil patch in Alberta that the reason the government and the oil industry is going so hard at these pipelines, not just the Enbridge Gateway one that goes through our part of the world, right through the heart of our home, but also the Keystone Pipeline and the twinning of the pipeline down to Vancouver. The reason there's so much urgency is that in 5, 10, 15 years, with the impacts of climate change starting to truly be felt and recognized by the broader public, these pipelines will become impossible to even suggest. So actually, and this is according to folks that work in the industry, the window to drive these pipelines through is open now but closing. And so you can see why the Prime Minister scooted off to China so quickly and brought the CEO of Enbridge with him, is that there's the energy industry that's interested in that kind of development is in a bit of a state of panic, and they realize that voters are getting wise. Now, to your question of energy security, I asked the heads of every single oil company in this country over a number of months, would they be open to an energy security strategy for Canada, where we had a national goal, we had a price on carbon, we started to talk about our own energy needs, and not one single head of an oil company in Canada on the record, and this is in public record now, said anything but yes. So if the oil industry is willing to have the conversation because they know it's important, and Canadians want the conversation, who's left on the other side? Well, then Stephen Harper and a couple of buddies. So let's recognize what's at play here. Energy security means sustainable. It means energy that we can rely upon, and it means affordable. We keep talking about how we're tied only to the U.S. market for our oil and gas products. Well, there's a second market that we never talk about at all. Well, that's the Canadian market, which we don't shift to. So we're so interested in helping the Americans get off their addiction to Middle Eastern oil. We even take full-page ads out in Washington telling them about it. Well, we should worry about our own addiction to Middle Eastern oil, which is coming out of Eastern Canada. All that to be said, the larger question remains, we need to put a price on carbon. We need to fund the true green economy. That means transportation, better homes, and all the rest, because this addiction to fossil fuel is actually an addiction that will kill us. It will kill us, and it will kill this planet. So everything matters for naught if we don't get at these poignant questions. But obviously, with the government that we have right now, there's zero chance of that happening. I just don't see it in their DNA. I don't think they're wise to this fact. I don't think they believe climate change is real or existing at all. So we're going to have to do something to replace it, and I think campaigns like this are the way to do it.
Thank you so much, Nathan, and thanks for the great question from up in Skeena. If you're just joining us, you can press 0 anytime to ask a question to Nathan. And we will go over to Port Moody, where Stuart has a question for Nathan.
Oh, hey, Nathan. You said in passing that you don't agree with the destruction of the wheat board, and I'm also assuming you don't agree with raising old age security to 67. Now, if the NDP were to form a national government and you were to be the leadership, would you address these issues, and would you reconstitute the wheat board, reconstitute the OAS, or would you kind of be disappointing like the Obama administration, who hasn't really done much and really underperformed the expectations that people had for him? How do you stand on that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's I was, like many, I suspect maybe you as well, Stuart, was truly inspired by the Obama campaign in 2008. And to feel so disappointed, even though I'm not an American, by the difficulty they had in manifesting many of their hopes was tragic. I think two things happened in their case, which might be different than ours. One is, I think the administration forgot who brung them to the dance. And that's something, as a representative in northwestern BC, I'm not permitted to do because representing the place that I represent, people are very comfortable reminding me consistently over these past 8 years, who is it that I work for, right? I work for the people that put me into office. So my commitment, my vision is that the connection that you and I and that we would have if I become leader and if go on to become prime minister is that we have to remember who brought us there. The second thing that's different from the states to us is that the actual system they've designed, their form of governance, allows all sorts of power nodes around Washington that undermine, and I think President Obama was actually undermined most by the Democratic Party, particularly these so-called blue dog Democrats in the South. So he ran up against that plus 2 wars and a complete meltdown of the economy. I think the opportunity for us when it comes to pensions, when it comes to the wheat board, is that for good or bad, the powers of the federal government, particularly a majority or a coalition government that's firm, are quite extraordinary. Now, reconstituting the wheat board, I'll admit up front, I think it's going to be a challenge. I think it's very easy to destroy and difficult to build. To go back into a supply management scenario where all farmers will get included, it'll be a tricky needle to thread. It's possible, and there are people on prairies right now working on plans to do that, but it'll be a challenge. So let's not go away with easy promises. On the OAS, that's actually a much easier one to do. We need it properly funded. We need a complete reversal of the direction that we've taken around public pensions in this country, and so that people know that the security is there. And, end the cynicism of Mr. Harper saying, well, we're going to get rid of some of the OAS, but don't worry about people that are currently in the system. We're just going to affect the people next in line. Well, come on, that's offensive. It's offensive to me. And the fact that he made the announcement surrounded by a room full of billionaires in Switzerland just added a little bit of salt to that wound. So, no, we'll reverse that course almost immediately.
Thanks, Nathan, and thanks for the really great question. I am going to go back over to Twitter for a question now. There's lots of folks weighing in on Twitter at the moment. And this is a question from Shalagur on Twitter, which reads this way. The next election is a long way away. What can you do in the next 3 years to stop Harper?
Well, 3 years might seem like a long time. The next election, the preparation for the next election starts now. You take a look at this robocall scandal. This whole thing of manipulating voters. I said it earlier in this call. I think we need to be out campaigning on this right now, and I don't mean just in front of television cameras from Ottawa. I mean out on the doorsteps. There are close to 180 people that work for the official leader of the opposition, and almost all of them work in Ottawa. Well, not under my leadership. We're going to start to branch this out, put the resources out into the field where people can actually get at them, start to organize around this, and we need friends. We need allies. We need people out there with those connections, with those lists, with the capacity to make social media work for us, to make it be the tool that it needs to be, which is to prepare that organization. Now, I think there's an opportunity to force by-elections. I think if it's proven and Elections Canada is able to say that there are fraudulent elections that take place, we saw it through the HST referendum that went on in BC. Governments tried to impose something that people didn't want. People got organized on the ground. They went door to door. They held events. They made sure that the government understood that the people have a voice. Well, now we're talking about something a lot more than just a tax on a candy bar. We're talking now about a government that may have fraudulently acquired its power. So I think the audience for this, I think the citizens that are out there ready to engage with us, well, it virtually knows no bounds. So no. March 24th is the end of this campaign. March 25th is when we start preparing for the next campaign to take this government down.
Thank you, Nathan. And welcome to any of you who are joining us now for the live town hall with Nathan. This is our English town hall for BC and the Yukon, and we will have a French language town hall later this week. Pour participer à l'Assemblée francophone, visitez le site nathancullen.ca ou la page Facebook de Nathan pour les détails. And we are going to go over, on that note, actually, to Glenn in Vancouver. Go ahead, Glenn. Oh, hang on one second. Bear with me. Glenn, you should be able to ask your question now.
Okay, Nathan, appreciate this town hall. Big concern of mine is how we're going to be able to maintain and strengthen the base that has been built up in Quebec. If we're ever going to win a government in this country, we're going to have to maintain that and build it, and I want to know how well situated you feel you are to do that.
Yeah, Glenn, it's a great question. And what's remarkable is, where I get that question most, as I've been touring around for the last 6.5 months, is here in British Columbia. It's really shown, obviously by the number of seats that we have there, but it's shown that this party is ready to govern the country, actually, because we're asking questions about, can the next leader of our party unify all those disparate parts of our country, from east to west, from rural to urban, and from Quebec and English Canada? Well, so far so good. The response to our campaign in Quebec has been particularly strong. And for reasons that seem somewhat obvious to me, but were a surprise to many, even the ideas about cooperation are being most well received in Quebec. And I don't think it's a surprise, because when we tried to form a coalition government, when we tried to work with other parties, every single poll that ever comes out always shows strength and support for that idea to be best in Quebec. So in terms of ideas and the way that I approach politics, that seems to work. The second piece of this, I suppose there's many pieces, but the second for me is language. Now, this is faculty. Do you have enough capacity in French to be able to handle yourself and have a conversation like the one we're having this evening in French? And that I do. My French is always improving, but it's at a conversational level right now that Quebecers seem to like. I have a very, some say it's a taxi driver French. I get along well on the street. I won't be lecturing at the Sorbonne anytime soon. But it's a second piece of that is the cultural understanding, to understand where those common values lie between Quebecers and the rest of the country. And you're right, this is a gift that we've been given. A hand has been extended and offered from Quebec. Do we embrace it? Do we understand that for the first time in a generation, they voted for a federal progressive option, and that was us. And under Jack's leadership, that was how that breakthrough came to be. Can we continue and extend it? And that means putting people in the field. It means our MPs going out and doing what good New Democrat MPs do, which is work extremely hard at the constituency level and maintain seats. We have a bit of a reputation. When we win places, we tend to hold on to them. But that's not just because of who we are, that's because of what we do. And what we do is work hard in those constituencies. So our natural starting place is that team of 58 MPs and all of their networks, and being able to ensure that they have a fighting chance to maintain and hold those seats while having a national leader that can speak to Quebec and speak to Quebec in terms that unify the country, not divide it.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Thanks for that great question. Really exciting to have so many of you on the line with us from all across BC and the Yukon. And if you have a question for Nathan, you just have to press 0 on your phone, and we're going to get to as many of you as we can. I am now going to go over to Alice in Enderby, BC. Go ahead with your question, Alice.
Yes. My question is, because I don't actually believe that people will engage in politics, too many people just don't bother. Would you support mandatory voting like they do in Australia, where I feel if you had to vote, people would pay attention, and if they had to vote, they'd listen to the issues, and if they had to vote, there wouldn't be any point in the robo calls, because Conservatives would know that you were going to go vote regardless, so you didn't get fined.
Yeah. It's an interesting proposal. I've looked at the Australian model, and there's actual financial penalties essentially if you don't vote. I suppose in everything that I'm doing and every approach to all these issues that I'm taking, I'm trying to find the more altruistic path first because it sends a conflicting message, right? When we say it's mandatory, you don't have a choice in this, you must. It says that voting somehow is more a responsibility than it is a right and privilege, and I think it's all of those things. I think it is a responsibility to vote. I think it's also a privilege that we have fought hard to have. I suppose sometime down the line, this might become more necessary. I guess, Alice, I can only look at the campaign that we've been running and see that when we talk about issues in a different way, in fact, in a less partisan way, we've opened up a whole new conversation with a bunch of people that have never been here before. And if we really want to crack that nut and get at that 40% of Canadians who consistently don't participate, I think we got to start talking about these issues in a different way, because while not many people are truly partisan, that they, are involved with a party or have a membership, most everybody I know is political. They do have an opinion about food, about the cost of education, about the quality of their job, about the environment, and about fish, and all these different issues. Those are all political issues. How we connect people to the idea that those issues happen at the ballot box, that's when the decision gets made, that's our job. And I think we do, as politicians and political parties, have to take some ownership for the lack of voter turnout. And this whole cynical robocall business and all the rest of it, it's intended to do one thing. That's to drive people away from the conversation. Our job now is to inspire, reinvigorate, and bring that sense of hopefulness and purposefulness back to the conversation. So I hear what you're saying. I guess I'm just not ready to go there yet, although, if we drop below 50%, in terms of voter participation, I think we have to start to consider all options. So let's try this one out first and see how it goes. And when people see their votes actually count and matter under a different electoral system, I think you're going to see a big bump in the number of people that come out to the ballot.
Thank you so much, Nathan. And we're going to go right over to another one of your constituents in Burns Lake. Go ahead, Marilyn, with your question.
Hi, Nathan. I'm wondering, because I'm very concerned about the pipeline being here in Burns Lake and going all the way to the coast, with our present government, how do you plan to defeat the pushing through of the Enbridge pipeline?
Well, Marilyn, the good news about this is that as I toured around the country for this year, half a year or so, I have been amazed and humbled by how many people know about the project and how many people are willing to fight shoulder to shoulder with us to stop it. I'm talking from, Halifax, downtown Toronto, northern Quebec, the prairies. I mean, in places where you'd think, well, why would they be concerned with this pipeline in northern BC? Know a lot about it, have engaged, and are joining groups and getting involved, and it's been incredibly inspirational. Really, it has. It gives me great hope. Now, where this struggle comes is in several places. One is certainly going to be in the Northwest. Those of us that are right on the front line are going to need help from people all across this beautiful province and country, and we'll do our part. We'll show up at those hearings. We'll stand the line. This may end up in court because the First Nations rights and title are being infringed upon. People are going to have to throw a few bucks into that kitty to make sure that there's proper support for legal action. And I think ultimately we have to drive this question to those conservative ridings across the country and make those members of Parliament feel the passion and concern people have for our environment and see how wrong this project is. I think it's the project itself, and it's also how the government has handled it, calling us radicals, calling us enemies of the state simply for standing up for our home. Well, by doing this, they've actually had a counter effect to what they wanted. They've drawn so many more people into the conversation and who are willing to say, I defend the rights of Canadians to stand up to their government and raise our voices. And we'll practice the politics of the Northwest right across the whole country. But thanks for the question.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. And if you're just joining us, you can press 0 on your phone at any time to ask a question to Nathan, and we're going to try and get to as many of you as possible. You can also press 1 if you're interested in getting involved in the campaign in the last few weeks, or 7 if you're able to support the campaign financially. And we're going to go over to Norm in Courtney, BC. Go ahead, Norm.
Hello. Hi, Nathan.
Hey, Norm. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to seeing you when you come here.
Hey,
but, I did want to say that I've been door to door here, and the thing that has delighted me is that every time I've come to the door with the issue of cooperation among the progressive parties, people's eyes light up. You were talking about maybe BC not being as behind it as other areas, but here in this writing, it certainly seems like it really enthuses people, and I think it'll actually really enthuse people who I once read that the stronger the differences in a coalition, the greater the synergy. And I think that the idea of people of Greens and NDP and Liberals working together will be a really exciting time.
Go ahead.
The question I have is I'd like to hear you comment on the strongest objection that I've heard to the idea of cooperation among the progressive parties was one of the other candidates suggested that we can't do it because we couldn't trust the Liberals to actually vote for the NDP after the runoff election. And when I look at the merger between the Alliance and the Conservatives, it seems to me that they got nearly 100% move over and buy-in on their merger, and all we're talking about is people come together after a vote. What is your opinion on this objection?
Here's the thing. I mean, I absolutely thank you for all that you're doing, by the way, Norman, going and talking to people, because I think there's been something where it's almost like a confessional. I have people coming up to me after every event saying, I really like your idea, but I don't think the party would, and I don't think other Democrats will. And the next person in line says the same thing, and the next person says the same thing. And I think there's actually a critical mass out there building who are saying, well, I've often been open to this concept, but I didn't want to say it out of fear of being attacked or being called not a good New Democrat. Well, A good New Democrat is somebody who's pragmatic and wants to see the world change for the better. Now, in terms of the hypotheticals, how this works, if there were a single candidate and they were a New Democrat in the riding, say around Vancouver Island or into the interior, what would Liberal voters do? And are Liberal voters actually very conservative voters? Well, I think there were some in the Liberal Party that were very conservative, but I think they've all left. They've long since left that party. And I could point you to a bunch of polling and focus groups that have told us that. In the last bunch of elections, those so-called, they sometimes call them manly Liberals or John Manley, by the way, not Manley. Liberals that are very, very conservative and never like the party's more progressive values. Well, that's fine. I think they're already gone. But let's not just concentrate on people who have previously voted Liberal or Green. I'm also, again, talking with those people who never voted at all. And one of the reasons why is they think all political parties are kind of the same. They're trying to, talk about the country, but really are mostly interested in themselves as political parties and as leadership candidates. If I hear another politician say, I want to do politics differently, and then when you ask them, what do they mean? They say, well, vote for me, and that's doing politics differently. I'm going to get sick. Like, enough's enough. Let's truly talk about it, but mean it and describe it. And let's have a little more faith in Canadians. If they're choosing between Stephen Harper and a Democrat candidate in their riding, and that's the choice, and they choose Stephen Harper, well, then so be it. They were probably already choosing Stephen Harper. You know who's making the best argument for cooperation right now? It's Stephen Harper himself. Every time he does another one of these crazy things that are so offensive to people, it drives people to a different conversation, and that's one in which parties find a way. If there's a will, there must be a way. So let's find it together.
Thank you, Norm, for that great question. And thanks, Nathan, for your answer. If you're just joining us, we're going to go for another few minutes. We can probably maybe take another 2 questions or so. And we're going to go over to Joan on Gabriel Island.
Hi, thank you. There's been little discussion in this campaign on foreign policy. I wonder if you could tell us a bit about what are your priorities for changes in Canada's role on the international stage.
Right. It's a great question. It hasn't gotten enough attention, John. Well, first things first, let's elect a government that believes in Canada's role on the international stage. Let's believe that role is one in which we seek to have peace more than war, and I don't think the current government can make that claim. My experience is based this way, and it may be a little bit different than the other candidates. When I was in university and throughout and then afterwards worked in South Central America and Africa in development studies and development work, and at the when I say this, believe it, at the most grassroots level possible. We're digging ditches, we're building community centers, we're just going through what it is to build community. So that's what informs my approach to foreign policy. The strongest voice that Canada can have is when we build up those institutions, those legal institutions, when we build up the capacity of countries to stand democratically in their own best interest. That's a great role for Canada to play. I think we're natural mediators as a country. I think that's been part of our past. It isn't our present, but it will be our future. Where we start to stand between, we need to put blue helmets back on again and say that it is okay and a good thing for Canada to stand between 2 warring nations trying to kill each other, and just adapt and accept the role that is where we have the most potential for good in the world. And it doesn't mean buying F-35 fighter jets for billions of dollars. It means truly investing in the people on the ground, particularly the women. My experience has been that the women leaders in a lot of these communities, particularly some of the poorest communities, are the strongest and don't get nearly enough the attention that they deserve. And I think an overarching development strategy for Canada could help manifest peace rather than only be involved when there's war.
Thank you so much for that great question. I think we can probably squeeze in 1 or 2 more. So I will throw it over to Roberta in Sparwood. Go ahead, Roberta.
Hi. My question is regarding Bill C-11, which is the Internet lockdown that's coming up, and also Bill C-30, which is the spying on the Internet as well. I'd like to know your position, and what do you think is possible to prevent that kind of legislation from going through at this point?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. What's possible right now? Well, we saw the reaction, particularly to the second bill you mentioned, Roberta, in that when the government said you're either going to give us access to all your internet searches and all of your emails, or else you must be on the side of child pornographers. Well, oh my goodness, did that ever cause a reaction amongst Canadians? And the government has since begun to step away. Bill C-11 is as problematic, but in a different way. The challenge for the government is they're actually touching into a community that is well connected, right? That folks that care about issues of a free and accessible internet are connected to one another and actually know how to organize. I think making ourselves and aligning ourselves with those groups in a more clear and conscious way is the way that we push back on these most draconian methods. That the government has to realize that just listening to the telecommunication companies is not the way to govern. You actually have to listen to the people who believe that the internet is critical, and the freedom of the internet is critical to its function, and actually plays a role in our democratic institutions now. So let's recognize it for what it is. So, power to the people on this one. If we don't organize both online and in the real world and push this government back into a place where they don't feel so enabled to clamp down and actually cause the internet not to be free and accuse Canadians of all sorts of terrible things, well, then we'll be missing our organizational opportunities. So it's both those things in Parliament, but then organizing out in the real world, in the social media world, to get this job done.
Thank you so much. And here is our final question from Antoinette in Revelstoke. Go ahead, Antoinette.
Hi, Nathan. Thank you so much for doing this, and thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. I didn't say this earlier. Thank you for all the donations that made this even possible, because without that, we wouldn't be doing this. Some of these things cost money.
This is a follow-up to Norm's question about, how can we deal with the question of we can't trust that the Liberals will actually vote for reform once they're in government. My question is that would there be any strings attached to the cooperation deal between parties in nominating a non-conservative candidate? Like, would it be conditional on a deal that once those candidates are elected into government, that they would promise to support significant electoral reform?
Yeah, it's a fair question. It would be very hard for a party to go through and do a cooperation deal like the one I'm suggesting, and then get into government and deny the idea that we need to change our voting system. So, low to the one who tries to do it. Do we need to formalize this? I'm inclined that way. I think when the Liberals are going through their own leadership contest over the next 18 months, they've got their own conversation to have. But I've been meeting with longtime Liberals right across this country who have been coming to our events, and Greens, who are saying, we are pushing this conversation within our own community. Don't worry, it'll happen next. And all of those groups like Lead Now and Avaz and groups that care about this issue will be applying equal, if not more, pressure towards them. So I think there's a bargaining chip here. I think we can say that some of these things are conditional on us making so that this only has to happen one time, because this is not perfect. This is not the way we want to do things. The way we want to do things is under a voting system where the competition can be held freely and fairly, and voters actually get what they voted for. So, yeah, I hear what you're saying in terms of the faith of what happens once we get in. But I say that also to our own party, to be frank, that when parties get in under this first past the post, even though they recognize the system's broken, the backroom guys get a hold of the deal and they say, well, it's a bad system, but it worked for us this time, so why don't we keep it for a while longer? I think we as New Democrats have to remain committed to this idea on our own grounds, and that will make it a lot easier to convince Liberals or Greens or others that this is a system that we must ensure happens, not just talk about.
Okay, and I think we actually can squeeze in one more question from Gwen in Hudson's Hope, British Columbia. Go ahead, Gwen.
Okay, thanks very much. The problem that I have a problem with party MPs always being subject to discipline. They can't vary from the party line, so sometimes they end up not reflecting the wishes of their constituents. So my question is, how would you create a balance between party discipline, which is needed, of the MPs, and the ability of MPs to reflect the wishes of their constituents?
That's a great question. Wow, two things. One, any of those issues that we know are part of the party's philosophy and will be whipped once we get into Parliament. I take, for example, a woman's right to choose. For me, as leader of New Democrats, that's an issue that if you run as a New Democrat, this is something that you sign on to. The freedom for gay and lesbian couples to marry. That's an issue that we've said this is where we stand on. Running for this party also implicates you in that policy position. But you got to keep that list short. You can't invent and put things onto the list after an election. So those are the two pieces for me. One is be upfront about what it means to run for this party so that the discipline is more natural and in common order. And secondly, that we don't extend this list and invent things after the fact and then say, okay, well, we've decided now that this is party discipline and that we're going to whip the vote. And as somebody who comes from the Northwest, it's happened a couple of times. And it's incredible that, that the parties somehow feel and get so risk averse that they can't allow an MP to actually defend the interests of their riding. And I live about as far away from Ottawa as you can get, and I've seen sometimes when Ottawa just gets it wrong. So let's get it right and allow MPs to do their job, which is to represent constituents. And let's also understand that there are some common things that we hold dear and that unify us as New Democrats. But let's be public about them. Let's be upfront about them, and let's be accountable about it so that we can't reinvent history after the fact.
Thanks so much for that great question, Glenn. We're going to keep going for another 5 minutes or so because there's still quite a number of you on the line, and we want to try and get through as many of your questions as we can. So thank you for continuing to be interested in the conversation, continuing to press 0 to ask your questions, and we'll just keep going for another few minutes here. So go ahead, Marcy in Metchosin. Marcy, are you there?
Yes, I am. My question for you is this. What would you do in terms of reducing the federal deficit? What would you cut, aside from the obvious things like the jets and unnecessary costs from prison? What things would you cut?
Well, Marcy, part of the good news is just by those two things alone, we more than balance the books, right? We know that the numbers around prisons right now will be somewhere north of $13 billion. And the cost of jets run anywhere north of $20 billion. The projected federal deficit over just this coming year will be somewhere in the range of 15 to 25 billion. So you're more than halfway there. You're almost all the way there. I think we need to cut the subsidy that the Canadian government gives to the oil sands. That comes in at about $1.3 billion every year. I think we need differentiated taxes. I think by that I mean a different tax rate for non-renewable resources than we have for renewable manufacturing industries. We need to take that money and put some of it towards the debt, but I think we need to take a lion's share of it and put it towards those industries that are actually adding value and trying to manufacture something, because that's the part of a good economy. We need a good economy, by the way. I don't think we talk about this enough as New Democrats. We talk about the service side of things. We talk about the programs that we need and rely on as Canadians. But we also need a healthy and strong economy that can actually pay for those services. So let's make sure we get the balance right. But yeah, even just eliminating these very wasteful programs is a good start. Some have suggested we knock off the Senate as well. Well, that I think is a democratically important thing to do. It gets you about $75 million a year, which is nothing to shake a stick at. But doesn't knock off the debt, as some people have suggested. It would take a little bit more than that. But we have a pretty good plan of balancing those books and getting things back on track.
Thanks, Nathan. I am just looking at Twitter for some questions that might come in. And I've noticed that someone commented that we haven't taken a question from the Yukon yet, which is actually true. And I don't have any in my queue either. So it's not from lack of it's not by design, I guess I would say. We've just not connected with anybody from the Yukon just yet. So if that person on Twitter can send through a question by tweet, I will do my best to take it. And in the meantime, we will go over to, well, I wonder if, Nathan, you might want to make a comment about, you did put out a policy on the North and potentially...
Sure. So as one of the only candidates, I think I may have been the only candidate to visit the Yukon. I'm not sure about that. The Yukon was desperately trying to get a debate together, and I was quite disappointed that the other campaigns wouldn't respond or wouldn't commit to actually going. I think that sometimes Western and Northern alienation is imagine, but oftentimes it's very real. And this was one of those very frustrating moments for me as a Westerner when it was so hard to get candidates to some of our Western debates and impossible to get them to the Yukon. We talked about the North in a different way from the government. I think the government's idea of the North is to militarize to allow for drilling for oil. That's about it. And I believe the development in the northern regions actually relies upon people. If you start with people and allow them to have a decent quality of life and some opportunities, then the sanctity of your borders, the ability to actually be a northern country is much more increased. As not exactly as far north as Iqaluit, but I'm in Smithers, and in the north we often feel that there's a desperate gap between the government's understanding of our lives and the reality of our lives, where things are very expensive. And but you know what? Without some of these rural and more northern communities doing what they do, everything in the city becomes a whole lot harder, because if we're not adding value, if we're not developing resources in an intelligent way, the impacts go right into rural and urban as well. So let's I think we might even have a Twitter question.
So here's the question. Nathan Cullen, would you support greater investments in Canada's north, including the military, to combat intrusions of other countries?
Yeah, I'll be honest, though. I think some of the Russian fear-mongering that was going on with the Conservatives, from the Conservatives early on, was just that. It was fear-mongering. I don't think the Russians were about to invade, but I think there is something important and sacred in defending our boundaries and our borders, and in that, this has unfortunately become a race to the bottom of the Arctic Ocean, in fact, where there is the potential for a bunch of oil and gas development, very high-risk oil and gas development, by the way, much higher risk than anything else that we've talked about on this call. So, yeah, I mean, a presence militarily certainly is important, but again, you invest in communities that are vibrant and strong and living there, there's your territorial argument. There's your border right there, that people are able to live, thrive, and survive in far and remote northern communities. Right now, the quality of living is terrible, and part of it is connected to the way the government treats people in the north, which is at best an afterthought. So, yeah, military presence, doesn't necessarily hurt, but it's not the be-all and end-all. Let's focus on people first and make sure those communities are strong.
Thanks so much, Nathan. And on that note, I do actually have a question from Whitehorse. It must be a case of asking you shall receive. So go ahead with your question, Jean-François.
Hi, Nathan. Jean-François here.
Hey, Jean-François.
Hi, how's it going? The NDP is a political party that was founded by the CCF and the labor movement. And those two were fundamental to the principles of the party. There are some elements in the party right now, and even some candidates to the leadership who have put in question the relationship of the NDP and Labour, and have expressed the possibility of distancing the party from Labour. How would you, as the leader of the NDP, rebuild, strengthen, and grow the relationship of the NDP with the labor movement?
Well, it's a great question, and I suppose I speak to it from the experience that I've had in northern BC and the campaigns that we've run. I think it's important and crucial to talk to the leadership of the union movement, but I think the mistake that we've actually made as a party, if I can offer some critique in the past, is that we've sometimes stopped the conversation there. And I know for a fact that you've got to go into the lunchrooms, you've got to go onto the plant gates and meet union members where they are and talk to them about a broad set of issues. I think it's critical to talk about the union movement and the issues that are front and center with them, but unionists are no different than other Canadians. Those in the labor movement also care about pensions, also care about a decent and clean environment, also care about these things. I lament when people say that we're going to throw partners and allies overboard and that's what's necessary to take the next step. That's usually not a good strategy in life, right? If you have support from one sector, you want to keep that support and then grow into other regions and other places. So two things. I think, go and talk to the union membership in a way that's different, respectful, and also put on the table what's really being questioned right now in this country. When this government attacks Air Canada or Canada Post, it's not about an airline and it's not about the mail. What they're attacking is a very basic idea as to whether it's a right in this country to join up with other workers and collectively bargain to form a union. And if we give these guys 8 years in majority, I don't know. I wouldn't want to bet on that right still being there 8 years from now. So, yeah, if we can activate and motivate union members and others around the country as to what's really at stake, well, then shame on us. But, yeah, let's go beyond just the executives. Let's talk to them and also actually sit in those lunchrooms and get our activists in there and not treat the union movement as any one broad thing that all thinks and acts the same. It's diversity within the labor movement as much as there is anywhere else, and let's renew those partnerships. Let's not throw them away in pursuit of power.
Thank you, Nathan, and thanks, Jean-François. And we have one more question from Whitehorse, just to balance out the BC Yukon balance a little bit. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Hi there, Nathan. So this is not necessarily a northern question per se, but I think it relates to the north. And what I'm curious about is how you might start to undo some of the damage that Harper is causing with some of the bills that he's bringing forward, like the crime bill and like the cuts to some of the climate change funding.
Wow, it is, I think, well, climate change in particular in the north has a disproportionate effect, as we know, that the temperature changes, the impacts in soil and erosion and all the rest are more severely felt in the northern parts of this world and northern parts of Canada. So you're taking the brunt. In terms of restoring, I said it earlier when we were talking about the wheat board, but it is so easy to destroy and so much more difficult to build. We have to rebuild our reputation with the world that we are a willing and active participant in being an honest member of the global community. And we can't say that right now. As the environment critic for 4 years, I was going to these UN meetings and attending all the Kyoto talks, and I could just watch. You could physically watch our reputation being eroded at every single step in the course of things. And so there's that. I think we need to not just become all oil sands all the time. The government right now is spending millions of our dollars, your dollars, my dollars, on promoting and trying to dispel any of the realities of what it is to dig up raw bitumen and export it raw, and that's a shame. So restoring faith within this country and for this country is going to be a huge part of what we do. The first plan I released in this whole leadership race was around energy security environment, about a green energy economy, and about bringing back some of the basic ideas. And for goodness sakes, let's let our civil servants speak again to Canadians. It's Canadians who have paid their wages and allow them to do the good work that they do in the sciences and others. And the idea of muzzling civil servants is just it's toxic. It's toxic politics, and there's so many different fronts. But the work's going to be tough. Let's not kid ourselves. To bring us back to some sort of decent and honorable place again is going to take a huge amount of effort, and it may take some time, but if we're all willing to do it, then pitching in, it will happen.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was a great question to wrap up this BC Yukon Town Hall with Nathan. I want to thank you all for being with us today. A week ago, we weren't sure that we were going to be able to do these town halls, and we're just thrilled to be able to have you all on the line with us. I know if we didn't get to your question, Nathan still wants to hear from you. You can join the conversation online on Facebook and Twitter and through our website. And if you'd like to get involved with the campaign, do press 1 and one of our campaign team members will be in touch with you. And if you press 7, if you'd like to indicate that you'd like to support the campaign financially, everything that we can do in the next couple of weeks makes a huge difference, and we really appreciate you being with us today. And also Nathan for joining us this evening. So I just want to pass it over to him for a final message to you.
Thanks, Linda. Thanks, everybody, for being on the call. This was a lot of fun. I'm glad we got to some questions. I wish we could have got to more. Well, we're in home stretch, folks. This is less than 2 weeks to go. Ballots are out. Voting is happening. Each one can reach one. Each one can teach one. This is about us connecting with New Democrats right now, bringing people to the conversation. If you're enthused about the campaign, hit one of those numbers Linda talked about. Give us a hand. We are the very definition of grassroots. This thing doesn't happen because of any big major backers out there, any big groups. It's been an honor to be a candidate in this race. We're fighting right to the end. We're going to run right through the finish line. I think there's so much work to do. I've been honored to stand on stage with these other candidates. I think they're remarkable people all. And we've got a lot of work ahead of us and a short amount of time to do it in. So, again, thank you. Thank you to Linda for hosting us and all you folks that donated to make this thing even possible. It's the only way we get our voice out, and I'm truly moved. Thank you.
Thanks, Nathan, and thanks to everyone for being with us. And do press 1 if you'd like to get involved in the campaign, 7 if you'd like to donate. You will hear from one of our team members. And thank you so much for spending the time with us this evening. Have a great evening.